Hey guys, Jensen here, and this video is going to be about the Mad Lions as the last remaining European team at the 2021 World Championship, and the big question is if they can carry on G2's torch as the LEC #1 seed. Now, there's been a lot of hype for the Mad Lions as they headed into this year's World Championship, with comparisons being drawn to G2 of the past and people describing them as similar to FPX as well, which unfortunately has been eliminated from the tournament, but a team that many people consider pre-tournament favorites. They consider Mad Lions to be that strong as they were very proactive on the map, and that is when people consider them to have played the best. And we have to kind of see how that holds up as we examine their run so far through the LEC bracket and as well as in groups, and to see if that holds up, if they're able to continue to maintain this level of gameplay. Now, in to further break this down, we have to examine how they got here. They won in the LEC playoffs, beating G2 in the quarterfinals 3-1, Rogue in the semifinals 3-0, and Fnatic in the finals 3-1, before going 3-3 in the group stages and then winning a tiebreaker against LNG to make the quarterfinals at Worlds. Of the three overarching styles available in the meta, between Drake stacking, two-lane pick, and scaling teamfighting, Mad Lions is a team that very consciously chooses to give up the Drakes in order to control the map. So Drake stacking is not necessarily a style that they play for. Of the remaining two styles, so far at Worlds, they have had a lot more success going with the scaling team fighting style, and whenever they have had to play a more proactive game plan against the other teams in the group, they lost the game trying this once against Team Liquid, LNG, and Gen.G as well. Long story short, the huge amount of success that Mad Lions had in the LEC playoffs, where they were able to very aggressively snowball off two lanes, playing lots of Ryze and TF, going 5-1 in the LEC playoffs, they have not been able to replicate that success at Worlds so far. And both times they went for Ryze and TF, they have lost so far during the group stages at Worlds. Now, unlike the other teams, there's two factors behind this. The first is to consider who the top laner is, which has been a very big and key factor in enabling the Rising TF to succeed in those type of metas, which is Armut. Armut at the top lane, his most two-played champions is the likes of Gnar and Wukong, which is much more suited to the scaling team fighting style of gameplay. Camille is not a champion he frequently plays, and this one game on Arella so far convinces us that this is not a champion that we will likely be seeing him repeat a performance on. The only champion that you would consider to be very effective to be played around would be Jace in the top lane, and the emergence of Graves as a very solid answer to the Jace in the meta has emerged, making this a much less effective pick. But what's interesting about Mad Lions is that they're not your conventional 1-3-1 scaling team fighting team. As you would see some of these 1-3-1 scaling team fighting teams, they'll play a very passive game. They just aim to extend the laning phase as long as possible, go into the mid game and try to pick up farm on as many lanes as possible. Mad Lions have the second highest combined kills per minute at 0.85, something that's very uncharacteristic when you think about a scaling team fighting team, and that is what perhaps makes them so successful and so interesting to watch. Another thing about Mad Lions is that once again, coming into this tournament, the hype around them was that they had the ability to win games from any position. And this was game 3 of the semifinals against Rogue, where they found themselves over 10,000 gold down and down the Baron buff as well, where Mad Lions were able to turn this game around. The same happened as well in the tiebreaker game against LNG, where at 15 minutes into the game, the Mad Lions found themselves at a significant disadvantage after two failed plays on the top side of the map, where LNG's top laner Ali were able to outplay them 1v2 and 1v3 two times, securing 4 kills on LNG's cannon on the top side of the map. Still, how does Mad Lions win these games? Is it them playing well, or the opponents making mistakes to let them back into the game? At this level of competition, I do think that credit has to be given to Mad Lions for being able to execute on the mid-game game plans to achieve that. Very similar to what we talked about in the past, this is where the comparisons to G2 and FPX start to come into play. The first big concept here is in the mid game, Mad Lions are able to force guessing games from their opponents. They have got two set plays when we end up in this map split scenario. This is something that is very reminiscent of G2's playbook from 2019 and 2020, where they would choose the same side after finishing a play on one side of the map, breaking the turn-taking convention where people would usually say, we'll take turns exchanging top side and bottom side of the map, and we just continue to seesaw our gameplay and extend the game out accordingly. Now, what would happen here is after teams usually push in the top side of the map, is they will recall and go out to the bottom side of the map, answer the wave that's being pushed in, and no action will necessarily happen. What Mad Lions does here is borrowing from G2's playbook once again, is they would do a little bit of a loop-de-loop and throw their opponents for a surprise, staying on the same side of the map with the original person pushing the side lane, picking up the mid lane, and Humanoid rotating from mid into the side lane to find a pick, if he's playing the likes of a LeBlanc or something that can force the picks in these scenarios. This can catch people off guard, and it did against LNG, catching off Ale multiple times, as he was caught alone trying to answer the topside wave. Mad Lions stayed on the same side of the map and were able to find free kills onto Ale. Now, this, when added on with their second weapon of choice, which is to borrow from FPX's playbook and go for the 4-1-0 at moment 3 to cheat the additional wave, can create a lot of headaches for their opponents. Now, in this scenario, it forces the opponents to try to guess what's going to happen without necessarily the information being available. If the opponents do not answer the top lane wave and they play it slow and cautiously, they can end up in a scenario where Mad Lions are able to sneak an additional wave, defend their own wave on the other side of the map, and then this puts the opponents behind on the map. Or if they then choose to aggressively push out the wave, they can then get picked off by this rotation from Humanoid into the side lane where Mad Lions originally played into. So this forces a guessing game from opponents when to play against Mad Lions in this mid-game setup, and it has been a very crucial tool for Mad Lions to be able to come back or create leads in the mid-game. Another very key characteristic about Mad Lions is their willingness to contest in side lanes, and this is something that contributes to the high combined kills per minute as well. A lot of times when you watch the Mad Lions play, they have TP wards set up to find place on the side lanes, even putting pink wards in the alcove bushes to enable TPs so that they have flanks and they're able to catch opponents who are trying to push the side lanes, be it as a team or individually. Also, once again, the comparisons to G2 don't stop there, as they always have a willingness to complete rotations in the side lanes behind opposing players. All too often you will see people hide um, after pushing out a wave, a neutral wave, hide around the Crux bush or hide around the tier 2 turret, and Mad Lions aren't afraid to run them down, hunt them down there, and find a kill for themselves. Now this all results in this combined kills per minute of 0.85, right? And this is what makes it so interesting. Like that Mad Lions, they actually achieve their scaling not by simply answering waves. They aggressively defend them and are willing to use these TP plays in order to look for fights, and it's enabled by the likes of Wukong and Gnar. So instead of having a situation where you have to think about fighting every 5 minutes when the Drake is spawning, this creates an opportunity for the Mad Lions to find fights, is either by forcing the gassing game. If they're going to go for the G2 style, we're going to stay here, we're going to cheese you on the same side of the map, or if we're going to sneak an additional wave and play into the other side in the FPX style, instead of looking for fights every 5 minutes, this might enable Mad Lions to skirmish every 2 minutes instead. But the downside of this, however, is that it consciously gives up power on Drakes in certain scenarios, as they will have to use their spells in order to take these side lane fights instead. So sometimes when it doesn't work out, it does give up free Drakes to the opponents, or if it only picks off one member of the opponent team should still be strong enough to secure the Drakes for themselves. What this is most effective against is that for teams that think about catching waves, against teams that think about defending waves, and this is an important distinction, it will be very effective against teams that are trying to catch waves as opposed to teams that are defending waves. As teams that are simply trying to catch waves, they will find themselves with the person in the side lane being undefended and very susceptible to the cheeses, or the FPX style of play, where Mad Lions would then be able to sneak in at an additional wave on the side of the map and find themselves in a map position advantage. Whereas teams that are able to defend waves, as seen in certain scenarios, you will see Mad Lions TP in, have the opponents be able to match their play, and Mad Lions would lose the fight subsequently. Now what's interesting about all of this is that so far the champion that has been working well for the Mad Lions at Worlds, considering all of these factors, has been LeBlanc. Despite my eye test telling me that Humanoid's LeBlanc has not been the most impressive, they have gone 2-0 on this champion with a KDA of 7. And once you consider what the macro aspects of it, Humanoid doesn't have to play the most amazing LeBlanc to help carry the team fights, but simply the execution of this champion, being able to execute on Madline's strengths in relation to what the opponents have, has been a very key factor and will continue to be throughout the World Championship. So the question is, can Mad Lions win Worlds? With their quarterfinals matchup against Telmon Kia and a possible semifinals matchup against T1 or Humble Life, this is something that we kind of have seen before. With all these comparisons to G2, one cannot help but look back at 2019, where there's a sense of deja vu, where G2 found themselves in a similar scenario, finishing in second in their group after losing a tiebreaker to a Korean team, and then going on to beat Damwon in the quarterfinals 3-1 before beating T1 in the semifinals 3-1. This is a script that writes itself, as once again, it fits the European two-lane style against the three-lane setups that the LCK teams usually go for. How much have the LCK teams evolved since then? Now that's something to explore in another video. But that's it. This is EU's last hope. Many people seem to have written them off, but there might be some magic going on over here. The Mad Lions choked the last time they went to the World Championship, losing in the play-ins in 2020. This time around, they find themselves the torchbearer of Europe. Can they carry G2's torch? We can only find out when they play the matches against the one Kia. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you like this style of content, please do consider giving my video a like and subscribing to my channel. I hope you have a nice day, and let's get hyped for Worlds. Quarterfinals coming.